Hi, my name is Christina Hardy, and today's presentation is on birthing the new humanity, the significance of the Pluto-Saturn-Mercury-Sun conjunction on January 12th, 2020. Some of you may be watching this prior to January 12th, and some of you may be watching it afterwards. For those of you, regardless, I'm also going to be including in here the full moon eclipse that's going to be happening on January 10th, and this is kind of related to our volunteer chart, which I'll be discussing at the end of this presentation. But first, I want to speak about why I believe the archetypes at this moment in time are really showing us that we are in the process, in the birth canal of birthing the new humanity. Before I do that, let me introduce myself. I'm Christina Hardy. I'm an evolutionary astrologer. I studied under Kim Marie Weimer for many years, about 5 or 6 years, and I became certified as an evolutionary astrologer this year. I've also studied with Richard Tarnas in the late 90s, early 2000s, and he is also, both of them are a very significant part of the building of my argument here for the birthing of the new humanity and the archetypes and the description of the archetypes involved, as I will explain as I go through. So beginning talking about our chart at this moment in time, the moment of birth. As you can see here, this is the exact moment in time when Saturn is conjunct Pluto in the sky. 22 degrees Capricorn, 46 minutes. Now this chart that we're looking at here is a 0 degrees Aries chart. So it places the planets in the 10th house with Aries on the horizon here. But the time is for Eastern time is 11:04 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So in astrology, the planetary placements in their signs and their relationships to one another is extremely important. If you are an astrologer, you totally understand that. Especially as an evolutionary astrologer, the relationship between the planets is critical. They tell a story that follows a developmental logic from within the context that it is given. So with a planetary conjunction, you will see that this is the new birth, the new moon time. It's the time of the new birth. Up until this point, life was tearing down and deconstructing the old systems. It is now at the pivot point when we are birthing a new form of consciousness, if we choose to do it consciously. That is why understanding the archetypal principles involved at any given moment is critical. We can work with these archetypes consciously when we understand them. So that's what I hope to explain as we go through here. I'm going to begin by describing the archetype of Saturn itself, and then the archetype of Capricorn, and then we'll be describing Pluto. And finally, at the end, which are also very important, will be Ceres, the asteroid Ceres, the Sun, and Mercury. Now, as you see, Jupiter is involved with the stellium here, and through 2020, Jupiter will be moving through, even though it's not part of this conjunction, it is very important for the year 2020 because it is going to be moving through this stellium over the next year. So it's definitely going to have its influence, so I'll be including that archetype, as well as the polarity point in Cancer, partially because North Node in Cancer, is always, it's part of this archetypal complex, as well as whenever we're speaking of a particular archetype like Capricorn, we've got to include its polarity, the Cancer. No one archetype is without it's like the other side of the coin. You can't split a coin and still have a coin. We're looking at both archetypes at the same time when we're looking at one archetype. Let's see if this works. Yep. So right now, this slide here, I'm showing you now up front the vision of where we are headed in this presentation. Okay, I will be explaining what birthing the new humanity means and what evolving from solar consciousness to galactic consciousness means. Okay, through speaking to the archetypes at this moment in time. That's where we're headed. As mystics, poets, and lovers of the dark time know, it is in the dark times that the eye begins to see. It is when systems collapse into disequilibrium that new possibilities emerge. For us human creatures, when our certainties are no longer certain, when our egoic identities grow threadbare, we are likely more receptive to the messages that come from the mystery. Now, the last couple of years, at least, we've been in the balsamic phase of, the time prior to the new phase conjunction. At this moment in time, on January 12th, it will be the new moon conjunction. So this is a time of seeding. And speaking to the archetype of Saturn, starting the archetypal process here. Saturn is the contraction of the incarnation process in space-time. As you can see, it rules space-time. It is about boundaries, the skin of our bodies on the physical plane. It's also the boundaries on the psychological and mental planes as well, our psychological and mental boundaries. It is what we are conscious of. It does not include what we are unconscious of. What we are conscious of is based on the conditioning factors of our birth and our early childhood years through teenage years, through the first 29 some odd years of our life, 28 to 30 years. Some of you as astrologers will recognize that as the Saturn return. We spend the first 28 to 30 years kind of immersed in the conditioning of our gender that we were born into, in the belief systems of our parents, and not to mention of our community, our neighborhood. It's what we inherited from our ancestors. It's also the boundaries of our economics. Were you born middle class or upper class, or were you born in the lower class? It really influences the conditioning of our consciousness. What is the social conditioning of your surroundings and of your parents? What was the religious conditioning? And what was the political conditioning of your time? This influences basically our conscissness in our early years, which we tend to play out for the first 28 to 30 years of our lives, first Saturn return, until we go through what do we call the contraction process and mature into and strive to expand our consciousness into something that is more in coherence with our soul. So the thing though is to feel secure wherever our consciousness, where our boundaries are, we tend to suppress what we are afraid of into the unconscious, okay? So again, Saturn is what we are conscious of and not what we are unconscious of. And then speaking to the Saturn return, Saturn rules the karma of time. This is the karma that keeps us focused on our trajectory, that we are going somewhere. There is a purpose. There is a meaning to this process. The cycle of Saturn works through approximately a 29.5-year process with quadrature periods of every 7 years within that, let's say, 28 to 30-year process. And so any Saturn return is a testing period, but after that, it includes 7 years of test within that larger 30-year cycle. Now, from Richard Tarnas, the cycles of Saturn that happen every 29.5 years are the next developmental step in our maturation process. When we work hard, are patient, and show commitment and focus on a goal, we earn self-respect and the respect of others, and accomplishments are achieved. These are periods that seem to function as a kind of constricting birth canal that bodied forth the next stage of life. This is from Cosmos and Psyche, page 124. So Saturn keeps bringing us back to the present through our karma. What I mean by karma here is our present moment that is created by our past choices that we've made individually, and there's also collective karma that influence our present moment as well. As we are birthed into a higher state of consciousness, Saturn asks us to take responsibility for our lives, to maneuver through the consequences of our choices with as much responsibility and integrity as we can muster in the moment. So rather than unconsciously creating choices that are reactionary to our self-created worlds, we are being asked to grow up. That's what the Saturn return is, and to do so consciously. Okay. So just some qualities here, some adjectives that I want to put out there of, you know, the positive Saturnian qualities. I'll definitely be speaking later about distorted Saturnian qualities, but speaking to the positive ones right now, excuse me, it means, you know, it's, as I've already kind of implied or said earlier, Saturn is about staying focused, resisting temptation. It's solitude, because Saturn, with the limitations of the boundaries, it forces us to go inward and self-reflect. And so we need to separate oftentimes from our world in order to do so. People with strong Saturnian natures tend to really need and enjoy solitude. Saturn rules commitment. Okay, to go where we need to go, we do need to stay focused and stay focused on our goal and our commitment. Self-respect, as mentioned already, working hard for a goal is Saturn. Patience, Saturn, which rules time, is definitely also rules. It often forces us or puts us into a position where we need to really slow down, have patience. Many of us just, you know, once we see the goal, we want to do it instantaneously. But Saturn, which rules time and space, takes time to get where we need to go. Saturn rules, you know, our accomplishments after having climbed a particular mountain, working hard to get it, experiencing the accomplishment and the self-respect that comes with it from having achieved our goal. Living morally and ethically, okay, whatever our personal philosophical belief system is, and whatever the boundaries we have on that, whatever our internal morals are or ethics, living and working and creating based on our morals and ethics. Keeping promises, Saturn rules that, and karma. So right now I'm going to speak about the Saturn cycles within the larger Pluto cycle. Okay, as I mentioned, Saturn cycle is 29.5 years, let's say 28 to 30 years. But Pluto's cycle is approximately 248 years. When Saturn and Pluto meet, it coincides with crisis and contraction. Okay, this is where Richard Tarnas, in his book Cosmos and Psyche, he speaks and gives lots of evidence for examples throughout history of crises and contraction that occur during the Saturn cycle. I'm going to speak to that a little bit more detail in a minute, but he gives a lot more detail than what I'm going to bring in here, or could possibly bring in here. But before I dive into that, first of all, the last time that Pluto was in Capricorn, remember it takes 248 years for Pluto to go around to make its cycle. So the last time Pluto was in the sign of Capricorn, the US was birthed at the signing of the US Constitution on July 4th, 1766. Let's say that again, 1776. So last time Pluto was in Capricorn was from 1762 to 1778. And so the birthing of basically when we declared our independence from England was during the last time that Pluto was in Capricorn. Okay, needless to say, for those of you who are astrologers, you'll recognize since the United States birth chart has Pluto in Capricorn, that means we're coming to our Pluto return in a few years, actually. Our Pluto's at 27 degrees Capricorn. So as you can see here in this chart, Pluto is at 22 degrees Capricorn. When it reaches 27 degrees Capricorn, it'll be somewhere between mid-February 2022 and the very end of December 29, 2022. So that's the exact, of course, there's usually for Pluto, which is a very powerful planet, planetary expression in astrology, its degrees are 5 degrees, at least 5 degrees, if not 10 degrees before, and 5 to 10 degrees after the exact conjunction. So even though Saturn cycles around every 30 years and Pluto every 248 years, the last time that they were both in Capricorn was just over 500 years ago, 540, 504 years ago. The exact Saturn-Pluto conjunction Capricorn was in January 1518. And the Protestant Revolution began at that time with Martin Luther having just nailed his 95 Theses to the church door in Wittenberg. So it was a religious, in which impacts the worldview, revolution at that time, needless to say. So now stepping to something else, I'm just giving some examples here to kind of give a feel for the archetypal qualities of Saturn, Capricorn, Pluto, and Capricorn. But now I want to talk about the cycles of Saturn and Pluto conjunctions. And this is where Richard Tarnas talks about this in detail in his book, Cosmos and Psyche, Intimations of a New World View. He has a chapter called, I think it's Crises and Contraction. And in that chapter, he shows that every time Saturn and Pluto come together in the sky, okay, it takes 31 to 37 years. Now, it's not an exact cycle, not because of Saturn, because Saturn has a very regular cycle, but because Pluto, its orbit around the Earth is kind of an extreme form of an ellipse. And so when it's on the outer edges of the ellipse, it takes longer for Pluto in relationship to the Earth, its apparent motion, to move through the signs. And when it gets closer to the Earth on the edges of the ellipse, it goes much faster. So there's a general, but it's still within 31 to 37 years when Saturn and Pluto conjunct. Looking at the last 100 years, the first Saturn-Pluto conjunction, about 100 years ago, began the 30 Years' War. All right, it began with World War I in 1913 to 1916, and ended with World War II at the closing square in 1939 to 1941. So Richard Tarnas shows how the starting of the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in the sky started this 30-year war with the quadrature moments of the first Saturn square, the opposition moment, and the closing square. Okay, again, he goes into a lot of detail on that. And then jumping to the second Saturn-Pluto conjunction, it was in precise coincidence with the beginning of the Cold War in 1946 to 1948. So the next 30 years of that Saturn cycle brought the Iron Curtain, the domination of Eastern Europe by the Soviet Union, and the threats and armaments of nuclear war. It was during this time, in particular when Saturn was opposite Pluto, that we started the Vietnam War. Okay, 7 years later, the next square brought the defeat to the United States and the takeover of communist regimes in South Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. Okay, now this conjunction is then moving on to the third Saturn-Pluto conjunction, which was 1980 to 1984. This conjunction was characterized by massively increased defensive armoring and military spending, especially in the United States, rigidly established boundaries, hostility, and mutual demonization, projection of evil outside of ourselves. And then the resultant rise of international terrorism and the ensuing war on terror. In fact, it was the first Pluto-Saturn square during this cycle that coincided with the first World Trade Center bombing in February 1993, and Osama bin Laden's first call for jihad against America and the coming of power of the Taliban in Afghanistan. The Saturn-Pluto opposition coincided with the September 11th, 2001 destruction of the World Trade Center and the attack on the Pentagon. This was followed, of course, by the US invasion of Afghanistan, and in March 2003, the invasion of Iraq. That is the cycle that we are completing right now, okay? And that's the cycle that you're seeing here with, Saturn having gone around the chart over the last 30 some odd years and having moved through balsamic phase, and right now at the birth moment for the new cycle. The next Saturn conjunction will occur in 33 years at 14 degrees Pisces. And who knows what will show up then, what will have manifested over the quadrature period in the next 33 years. We don't know. But as astrologers, we learn from our past. We learn about the archetypes and how they've expressed themselves collectively, as speaking here, as well as personally. So this gives us some of the nature of the archetypes of the conjunction or the relationship of Saturn and Pluto. And since Saturn rules Capricorn, the sign that they are both in now, it is a time period of being in the birth canal, and then the contractions of the birth canal, which can create crises, and certainly the contractions and the fears that occurs through contraction. Now I'm going to move through and describe Capricorn, the archetype of Capricorn, okay, so we can have a better understanding of this. And I'll pull this all together to talk about how to maneuver through these times right now. So Capricorn rules structures, plain and simple. It rules structures, both natural structures and human-made structures. In other words, structures, in other words, being laws. For example, natural laws like the laws of physics, gravitation, classical mechanics, quantum mechanics, general and special relativity, electromagnetism, and so on and so on and so on. The laws of biochemistry or chemistry, the laws of astronomy, the laws of geology, geography, and so on and so on. So it is basically the laws of physics that govern our universe. It also rules the structure of the seasons, spring, summer, fall, and winter. And the cycles that we consistently see through time of the emergence of life through spring, the flourishing of life in the summer, the decay in the fall, or the release of life in the fall, and then the death in the winter time, and the internalization of winter, and only to reemerge again with birth in the spring. Other natural-made laws ruled by Capricorn would be the structure of the birth canal of the Great Mother herself. She who has given birth to space-time itself in all matter, and all that has been created and made manifest in form. Capricorn also rules the laws that guide us to our individual births. Now, Capricorn, as I mentioned, not only rules natural laws, it also rules human-made laws, all right? It represents society, the rules, the norms, the taboos, the laws which allow any group to function together as a unit. And it includes that which are considered the standards of right versus wrong, all right? It allows us to function together. It's the reason why we don't just plow ourselves through, stop signs or red lights. It allows us to survive as a functioning unit with lots of other people, okay? Now Capricorn, with Saturn as its ruler, also rules the environmental conditioning factors of life itself that we all are born into. The gender that we are born with and our relationship to that gender, whether we like it or we don't like it. Whether we harmonize with it as a soul or not. And also it rules family genetics that we've inherited, our ancestry, the stories of our ancestors, and certainly the stories of our the family that we were born into or were adopted into. It rules the belief systems, okay? The religious, spiritual beliefs. And again, so the reminder is that Saturn rules Capricorn. This is boundaries. It's the conditioning of our consciousness. It rules our economic conditions. Were you born in the middle class or upper class, or were you born poor? That certainly has an influence on our psyche and our thoughts and our mentality. It rules certainly, as I mentioned, the religious and spiritual beliefs. Okay, and then the environmental conditions that we were born in. Capricorn rules social positions of authority and leadership, okay, as Capricorn is the top of the chart, the 10th house in the chart. It's the public persona, And it, as the ruler of it's the last of the 3 earth signs, okay? The first earth sign being Taurus, the second one being Virgo, and Capricorn being the 3rd earth sign at the top of the chart. It is where it rules, where we take our talents and service, or give it to society. And then it rules, you know, the hard work and the desire to achieve at the top of the social ladder, if you will. Some people relate to that, some people don't. So either whether you're rejecting it and rebelling against it, or whether you're completely, you know, aligned with the laws of consensus society and do whatever you need to do to achieve power at the top of society. Regardless of where you are on that polarity, it's still governing your choices in that polarity. Some keywords here with Capricorn and Saturn as its ruler. So and this is obviously the positive functioning, where we are taking self-responsibility rather than projecting and blaming and not owning responsibility for our own work in the world. So this is the maturation process to become a contributing member of society. Capricorn, what does it entail? Self-responsibility, accepting responsibility for one's actions as well as the results of one's actions. Self-determination, the discipline to take charge of one's life within society, including a career. Authority, establishing individual authority within one's personal life and in society. One's personal karmic obligations, which I've mentioned already, that which we are answering to in the present, that is a result of our past actions. It also rules societal and karmic obligations, you know, to the elders, to the children, to other people. It rules, as at the top of the chart, resource accumulation and management based on our personal value system. Taurus, 2nd house, is, you know, that's the pursuit of what is my value system and how will I develop my talents based on my values or in alignment with my values. Capricorn at the top of the chart is, you know, the accumulation and management of resources that one has created based on one's values. There is the inclusive side of Capricorn, which is giving and sharing and including others, whereas one can fall on the other side of the polarity, where one is taking, hoarding, and excluding. Okay, there's, of course, and we fall all along that polarity, and sometimes we're on one end, sometimes we're at the other end, but this is ruled by Capricorn. Security, recognizing that the outer world is only as secure as our inner world, okay? And this is where the negative or distorted expression of Capricorn is, where we are dependent upon the outer world for our own security, or other people for our own security. Capricorn, with the ruler of Saturn, is involution, the inner reflection to become aware of one's own inner dynamics and motivations, the inner acceptance of self, regardless of what one's outer world ultimately is, not being dependent upon one's role in the world to feel secure or to feel acknowledged, that one is sort of driven internally instead. Distortions of Capricorn. As you can imagine, this would be the polar opposite of much of what I've already said, but just to kind of, so you can see both ends of the pole. Rigid standards of right and wrong. Since Saturn rules boundaries, one can get locked in to whatever one's belief is, and then operating without, you know, with this sort of black and white thinking, without sort of recognition that there's many ways of expressing the rules in society. So, and judging others, projecting, you know, onto others as not, you know, whether they're following the rules or not, or in whether they're in the right place of society or not. Judging others is definitely a distortion of Capricorn. Blaming others rather than taking responsibility for oneself. Overly controlling or manipulating others, especially those we consider less, you know, as you're working up the hierarchy of the ladder, looking down on others with judgment rather than having the compassion of the Cancer polarity. Wealth inequality, definitely a distortion of Capricorn, where the social classes have become split between the haves and the have-nots. We've definitely been experiencing this for a long time, especially since 2008, when Pluto went into Capricorn. Attached to one's role, creating a cost to the heart and soul. Okay, the Cancer polarity is the heart, the soul, one's family. It's our feeling nature, it's our emotional body. So when one becomes polarized to the Saturnian Capricornian archetype, this is where one becomes lost in the world and loses one's alignment with one's soul. And this in itself produces depression, passivity, lethargy, the loss of the desire to live, and a weariness, because one is running from outward expectations rather than inward expectations. Okay, and the inability to change certainly is Capricorn, based on fear. Okay, so next slide is, again, so here I'm showing the Capricorn Cancer polarity. So as I mentioned earlier, when any archetype will contain within it its opposite, just like the other side of a coin. So Cancer is the antidote to so much of this heavily weighted Earth Capricorn energy that we're experiencing now. And I'll be talking more about this as we go through this presentation. So moving on to the archetype of Pluto. So as you see, Pluto exactly conjunct Saturn, as I've already talked about. We are seeding right now. We are in the dark time right now of this Pluto starting a whole new cycle with Saturn. So the archetype of Scorpio, which is ruled by Pluto, which is also the same archetypal of the 8th house, basically, first of all, it's a water element and it's a fixed modality. It's also passive polarity. So, but the water fixed brings a sort of this intensity to the water and inward through the passive polarity, working inward. The fixity can make for, strong stubbornness, emotional stubbornness. But fundamentally, what Scorpio, Pluto in the 8th house describes is basically power. That's the area of the chart, and Pluto as the archetype that rules the 8th house, where the power is centered, okay? It rules the evolutionary force itself. This is what Pluto is in evolutionary astrology. We look to Pluto as the soul's desire to evolve. All right, I'll talk a lot more about that in a minute. Pluto is a strong cathartic agent. It cleanses and it purifies through the cycles of death and rebirth. It compels each individual to cast aside all that is not essential, all that is not of our essential nature, to become the truth of being in alignment with our souls. It does so through the death rebirth process. Okay, Pluto. Okay, imagine the wave coming out of the oceanic waters. I think this is a very good metaphor for Pluto. It shows the power of the wave itself. Okay, Pluto symbolizes the original desire to rise out of the infinite field of consciousness, which is the oceanic waters being undifferentiated. So the original desire is basically God's desire to get to know itself, in its multitudinous, individual forms, as we have now birthed individual souls. It's God's desire, or the universe's desire, the divine's desire, whatever you want to call it, to experience itself on a deep level as a unique consciousness. And that is our soul's desire as individual, unique beings. To do so, we choose to separate from the infinite consciousness. Okay, this is the original separating desire, which is the archetype of Pluto. This is the, again, the archetype of the evolutionary force itself, as it moves through lifetime after lifetime after lifetime, accumulating experiences and sort of a self-awareness of self versus others through time. Unfortunately, as we go through life, and because of the harsh conditions of life, Saturn, we will accumulate wounds. And some of the wounds are just, I mean, oftentimes the wounds are just purely for the sense of security in a very, very extremely insecure world. But the intent is to learn enough internal security so that we can operate within the world in alignment with our original soul desire, or our soul's desire in the moment even, without fear, and to be really centered in the power of our own individual souls. This takes many, many, many lifetimes to do. What we do is we, according to evolutionary astrology, is we incarnate, we bring in the wounds with us when we incarnate for the purpose of becoming aware of the wounds and healing those wounds, taking self-responsibility for the healing of those wounds, okay? And so basically over time, as we heal the wounds, we become more and more an empowered expression of the divine consciousness, okay? So as an evolutionary astrologer, we look to Pluto in the chart as the archetype of the core desire of the soul and the emotional security patterns that prevent us from evolving. That's what we look to. What is preventing this soul from evolving in this lifetime, or when they incarnated? Why did they choose this particular placement of Pluto and all the planets that are in relationship to Pluto in order to, why did it choose this? I mean, why is definitely a Pluto question, and the deep exploration of the unconscious in order to understand the wounds that we hold, okay? And so once we know where the insecurities are, the emotional vulnerabilities, then we can work towards healing and evolving the soul. Okay, so, but the point here is also to make sure it doesn't get lost in my description here, is that our soul is the holder of the memories of many lifetimes of accumulated experiences, both positive and negative. However, an evolutionary astrologer is going to look to the insecurities, the challenges that we brought in order to heal and evolve. Okay, so Pluto rules the process of evolution itself. As I said, as I mentioned, it's the original desire of God to know itself, leading to the process of individuation. Okay, the singular wave or soul over time accumulates experiences, both strengths and weaknesses. I mentioned this already. It is the wounded aspects of ourselves, the vulnerable places. It is the emotional insecurities that have been created by creating externally dependent security patterns. Okay, and Pluto will come through, will come in a lifetime and sort of create the impulse to transform those insecure patterns and to create security patterns that are more true and more real. Pluto also shows us how to heal, integrate, and evolve the soul in this life through its Pluto polarity point, which shows us what the evolutionary desire of the soul is prior to incarnation. And so this is the exact opposite point of Pluto itself. Okay, so we look to the opposite point of Pluto to find out how to evolve from the insecurity patterns that we've brought in with us. Now, Pluto this is part of another slide too. So I've already spent a lot of time talking about how Pluto works for, you know, the emergence and individuation out of the oceanic, undifferentiated consciousness of divine consciousness itself, in order to express the divine as an individual, unique consciousness. It's kind of like the individual wave, right? The problem occurs, now this is part of, well, let me back up a little bit. This is part of the developmental process. There is absolutely, you know, no right or wrong about this. This is how we develop, and this is how we grow, is to experience ourselves as empowered individuals in the world, right? And so we spent lifetimes working on developing our talents and empowering ourselves personally, and then in relationship with others, and then out in society, and so on and so on. However, there's a time when if we get caught up in holding on to the power for ourselves, locking in the power and excluding other people, or sort of the desire for power, being the power over others rather than in relationship with others. With time, as a soul continues its impulse to evolve, it's going to create serious distortions. And some of those distortions we certainly are experiencing in our world collectively, globally right now. And this is cruelty on a massive scale, ruthless cruelty, totalitarian rule, people just holding on to power and then building power outside and around them to hold on to their power. Okay. But eventually, the evolutionary power, which is so much greater than our individual power, will force us to release our self-serving power, okay? Now, as souls, we live constantly, all of us, even if you're the general of an army, or, at the top of the country and ruling by a totalitarian control, all of us as souls are living at a juncture where we desire to individuate, and we also desire to return to divine consciousness, okay? Eventually, with time, the intention is to align the ego of the soul through progressive union with the source by re-identifying the ego with the source rather than with itself, okay? So, and this is where this shows the tension here, the push-pull, that every choice we make, is it a choice towards, empowering ourselves to the exclusion of other people, or is it a choice to to surrender, allow ourselves to basically to surrender our ego to something much greater than ourselves? Now, it's fearful for the ego identity to surrender to something it doesn't know what it is. So it tends to hold on, oftentimes desperately, decade after decade, after lifetime, to whatever, security patterns it can find. But eventually what happens is, by Kabir, I got a poem here by Kabir, which I think describes it pretty well, is as long as you're still a slave to even the subtlest greed or most hidden lust for power, illusion has its noose around your neck, pulling it every day, tighter and tighter. Okay, that noose we've experienced, as personalities in the world, experiencing the suffocation of sort of the Saturnian karma that creates a sort of self-isolating world when we are not surrendering to the divine, and experiencing ourselves in the world as isolated islands and not connected to one another. Now, Pluto works like by trials by fire, okay? Needless to say, the transition process of moving from an ego-centered consciousness based upon a singular solar identity to one that is, identified with the consciousness of divine love or the larger divine consciousness is not easy. I actually ran across this image, what was this? It was probably in the mid-90s when Pluto was conjunct my Saturn. And I was like, wow, this is just the perfect image for my experience right now. Truly trials by fire. The fear that one experiences is extremely intense. Pluto works. This is how Pluto works, by the fire, transmuting the conditioning that keeps us constrained and bounded in fear. So it's relentless. I have a quote here by Dane Rudhyar it's from his book, The Sun is Also a Star, which I just love, that describes this process. Pluto registers the fact that a time has come for the possibility to move from one level of consciousness and activity to another. He then produces the conditions required for such a passage or transmutation. The more bound the consciousness is to Saturnian patterns and memories, the harsher these conditions. Pluto can be ruthless as well as relentless, what we know as the dark night of the soul or trials by fire. If the soul is ready for the descent, she may, with calm strength, meet the Plutonian process of total stripping away and the void to which it leads. Such a person carries in her heart the vision of where she is going and no longer resists the transformation, whose purpose she consciously makes her own. She can then become a clear and profound expression of her divine fundamental nature. Again, this is by Dane Ruggier in The Sun is Also a Star. So just again, I want to point out here sort of the rock, the plutonic rock, that sort of the fire of the volcano is just burning right through to emerge into, and we must be a holder of our own internal vision as to where we're going. More on that in a minute. So right now, though, with Saturn and Pluto, we are inside the birth canal. Okay, as I was talking about earlier, with Richard Tarnas's research and the crises and contraction of the birth canal, Pluto's evolutionary pressure combined with Saturn's constriction. So Saturn's constriction, this is what I want to talk more about here. What are the insecurities that you are here to transform? That's the question. Okay. Face your fears relentlessly. This is the birth canal in the birthing process. Okay, we can't jump out to our vision yet. We are still in the birth canal. The constricting forces of our conditioning that no longer serves us individually or collectively is suffocating us. The evolutionary pressure, Pluto, to evolve presses against the birth canal, Saturn, and intensifies time, which is Saturn. The canal constricts Saturn, and yet it forms the structure itself, right? That we are to create the new, I don't want to say new birth canal, but it's like we're here to evolve the birth canal, the boundaries of the birth canal, into something that really serves our soul, okay? Saturn is that which we fear, and is our fears that are our teachers, our personal guides in this process. It will guide us into creating the new birth canal. Again, I shouldn't say new birth canals, transmuting the old into the new. So the question is, as we're preparing for our own births, how do you engage with the fear? Do you choose to reinforce the contraction by fighting it or amplifying it, and thus reinforcing the fear in time and space? Do you choose to attempt to suppress the fear, thus weakening the structure that you are building? Or do you choose to surrender to the evolutionary forces themselves and surrender to the innate intelligence of the universe? How do we as a conscious species surrender to the wisdom embedded in our souls to lead us to our individual collective destinations? Okay, we are birthing the new consciousness. The evolutionary journey necessitates that we move from solar consciousness right now. That, in other words, that consciousness that is solely focused on our personal self-identity towards a galactic consciousness. And that is an identity that embraces universal consciousness. Now, as I move in here, I'm going to, oh yeah, one more slide here I want to show you. So, in the solar system itself, Saturn is the boundary between the personal planets and the transpersonal planets of Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. So Saturn really, as a sort of archetypal symbol, this is when I think of the solar system itself, and Saturn's placement within the solar system and what it represents is the boundaries, and it is those boundaries that we are transmuting at this time. So there are a few more archetypes to look at here that is helping us with this birth at this moment in time, and that is Sun. Let's see here. There's the Sun at 21 degrees, almost exactly 22 degrees. Ceres, the archetype, the asteroid Ceres, And Mercury on the other end here, 23 degrees, 10 minutes. I'll be showing you how these are helping with the birthing process. So Sun is our solar identity being birthed to expand and embrace galactic or universal consciousness. Mercury, for those of you who are not astrologers, are, well, the same thing with the Sun, but with Mercury, it's our conscious experience in the here and the now. Okay, it is the, it's our analytical, sort of logical mind. It's Mercury rules how we communicate, it rules how we connect with people. It's how we kind of learn about reality from the reality right in front of us, and how we make sense of our reality through the five senses of seeing, hearing, and so on and so on. I used to know the five senses right off the top of my head, but seeing, hearing, can't remember. Okay, so, but you know what I mean, tasting and so on. So, but it basically, Mercury is transmitted through the five senses. It doesn't jump out of the five senses. So it's our consciousness in the here and now through the physical body. And then we have Ceres, which is the Earth Mother, who is birthing, helping us to birth this new form of consciousness on a planetary wide scale. So starting with the Sun and Mercury, galactic consciousness as embodied in the here and now. It's the consciousness that knows that our sun is only one of over 200 billion suns in the Milky Way galaxy alone. All right, we have probably 100 billion galaxies in the universe, but this is just 200 billion suns in our Milky Way galaxy alone. And just from what they've been able to see in our neighborhood in our galaxy, 2,500 solar systems, okay? Now, given how many solar systems that they have found in our neighborhood of the Milky Way galaxy, scientists estimate that there may be tens of billions of solar systems in our own galaxy, perhaps even as many as 100 billion. Thanks to the Hubble Space Telescope, we can, thank the Hubble Space Telescope, this incredible thing that has been created by humanity, to be able to, bring our eyes out into the universe to see what surrounds us, and ultimately is very much a part of us. So the Hubble Space Telescope is constantly bringing us images that really helps us to inspire us into this broader galactic consciousness. Now to Ceres, the archetype of Ceres. In its simplest form, she represents the Earth Mother. Okay, the name Demeter comes from Demeter, or the Earth Mother. So Ceres is the Roman archetype, or the Roman name for Demeter, which was the Greek goddess. So the Romans have allocated Demeter for themselves as Ceres. So the asteroid was given the name Ceres, but she basically represents the Earth Mother. She represents agriculture and is associated with grain crops, fertility, and the general sense of motherliness. Okay. Astrologically, Ceres represents how we were nurtured in our early life, and what we need to feel loved and nurtured as an adult. Like the moon, like the personal moon in our natal charts, but she is considered the higher octave of the moon. So we are birthing the new conscious, an essential component that's missing with all that Capricornian energy. If we just focus on that polarity, the importance of Ceres, the archetype of the Great Mother, birthing us to this new consciousness. Actually, I meant to say the collective mother, as well as the personal mother, is how we, we nourish and nurture ourselves individually, as well as right at this moment in time, the North Node is in Cancer. In evolutionary astrology and in astrology in general, the North Node is the future ego identity that our evolutionary intention is to develop, and so we're developing the feeling nature, the emotional body at this time as the antidote to the dryness of the Capricornian distortions. We've spent thousands of years of creating through ignoring and sort of splitting from our emotional natures in order to become, safe and secure in the outer world. But we now have recognized, we've come to the place of recognition that the outer world does not create safety and security. It comes from within. And the internalization is being in alignment with our emotional bodies, our feeling nature, as a guide towards birthing the new. We must surrender to the Earth Mother, who has given birth 1 billion times to humans, animals, plants, and to matter itself. She knows how to give birth. We must trust her. She is validated through our emotional body, our feeling nature. It is the archetype of Cancer, the moon in Ceres, that is the guide in this process. Birth takes emotional courage, especially when it means surrendering to something greater than ourselves, and to trust that we are not in control. It means surrendering to the larger forces of life to guide the process towards what we envision, that the vision that we hold in our bones as the new way of being. What is the desire? Where do we want to go? If it was up to us to create a new life, what would that life look like? What is the vision that we hold? The birth canal is the cauldron in which we are given the focus and the time to envision the new structure of being. Okay, Jupiter rules our belief, the expansion of our consciousness, and that is going through Capricorn. So bringing our vision to the new structure and restructuring and transmuting the crystallization of the old structures through allowing the vision to guide us to our future. Okay. So how can you engage in the evolutionary forces of birth at this time? Right now, I'm going to look at a volunteer's birth chart. His name is Sean. And it's interesting because he had his birthday, or well, he hasn't had his birthday yet because I'm giving this presentation before then. But this whole presentation is on the January 12th conjunction. His birthday is actually on January 10th. And interestingly, the solar return for his birth, well, actually, sorry, Sean, his birthday is on January 11th, but the solar return is on January 10th when we happen to have our full moon eclipse on January 10th. So he's got an interesting chart, and it'll be really interesting. We're going to talk about here how I'm going to talk a little bit about his chart and place everybody so you can place Pluto and the transits, in relationship to his chart. But this will give us clues as to what areas in Sean's life the universe is asking him to pay attention, focus, and to surrender to the Great Mother's birth. And so I'm going to introduce you to Sean. Sean, you won't be able to see Sean here because he doesn't have a audio or video on his computer, but he is here. Hi, Sean.
Hi.
I didn't lose you through the presentation, huh?
No, I'm here.
Okay, great. So, and you can see the screen still, right?
Yes.
Okay, great. So again, I don't have Sean's birth information here. We get his birthday on January 11th, but the solar return happens to be on January 10th, which is interesting in itself, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But what I first want to talk about is the transits for January 12th. And as an evolutionary astrologer, we always start with the placement of Pluto, okay, in the natal chart. So for those of you who are not familiar with this kind of bi-wheel here, this is Sean's birth chart in the center, okay? He's got Sun in Capricorn, being born January 11th, 20 degrees Capricorn, Mercury in Capricorn, Moon in Aquarius, Venus in Aquarius. So this is his natal chart on the inside. And this is the transits on January 12th on the outside. So as you can see on January 12th, at that time, he's got, Saturn and Pluto are just 2 degrees beyond his sun. So, but first let's go back to Pluto here. As an evolutionary astrologer, we always start with that. That is the foundation. And so the description of Pluto, okay, well, I don't have that right here. That's interesting. All right. So Pluto in the 8th house, to start with that, whoops, there we go. Pluto in the 8th house, its quality, basically 8th house is intensity, right? And then when you have Pluto, the ruler of the 8th house, in its own house, it really increases the intensity of this lifetime. Pluto as the ruler of power, it actually tells us the soul incarnated with the deep radiating core of power with Pluto in the 8th house. As we know, Pluto can be fixed, it can be stubborn, emotional stubbornness, because Pluto rules is a fixed sign in water. And Pluto's very deep. It likes to just go inwardly, especially psychologically deep, which gives it sort of impatience with superficial relationships. It had Pluto being, the power of the soul itself. It shows this individual may have a strong ability to motivate others. And also Pluto's quite magnetic, attracting strong, powerful people to themselves, but also, having both positive and negative. Okay, Pluto's neutral. It's not bad or good. It's neutral. So it is a magnetic force that attracts people and situations to itself. And it can be very Pluto can be very in the 8th house, especially remember I'm speaking to sort of the emotional wounding, the insecurities, and especially when the insecurity is deep, it can be very judgmental of others. This is right versus this is wrong. Sean, I'll give you definitely a moment after I'm done with this to agree, and feel free to disagree with me. I'm totally good with that. Just help me to qualify this. Pluto is the archetype of desire to know, a desire to merge with life itself, or to desire to merge with something greater than itself. It needs to know, and it asks a lot of why. It's the why, always asking why. And because it is fixed water, there will be times of emotional withdrawal. Sometimes it can be to the point of being secretive. And usually if secretive or emotionally manipulative is because they don't trust others. 8th house it does represent, it's not so much relationship, but especially merging resources with others. But with Pluto in the 8th house, as one is born there, it shows a soul that is bringing in prior life memories of having the rug pulled out from underneath them. And so there's a fear of that happening, which can create a defensiveness, a protectiveness, and also sort of a suspicion of the motivations of others, especially in relationship to merging resources with others. But the evolutionary intention, which is the Pluto polarity point in the 2nd house, is to trust others, to learn to trust others. And this happens through identifying one's internal values and then building the resources based upon one's internal values in a way that sustains. So rather than being dependent upon the forces of other people, building one's own platform, one's own foundation through one's own self-effort. And it has to be in alignment with one's own internal values. Otherwise, it just gets ripped out from underneath one again. It is important for a soul with a Pluto polarity point in the 2nd house to become intellectually, spiritually, and psychologically self-sufficient and physically self-sufficient. So that ultimately, once the foundation is built and the security is from within, then feeling much more freer to participate in a committed and growth-oriented relationship in a non-dependent, compulsive way. Okay. All right, so what do you think, Sean? Just speaking to this, I'm not speaking to, of course, you got, Jupiter, Mars, nicely trining that, but just speaking to Pluto and the polarity point. And feel free, because I know you know your own chart, feel free to bring in other dynamics as well.
No, I would agree with everything you said.
Okay. So there is, I mean, we've got this beautiful sort of Jupiter-Mars trining Pluto here, which gives tremendous amount of sort of life to engage with life and to engage with the intensity of life itself, and to expand one's experience, especially in the third house, to learn about life. But then Pluto is, we got a, why am I thinking Pluto is square? It's not square. 24, 6, nope, never mind. Got that one wrong. It must be the transit that's squaring. So,
I just noticed that
yeah.
For this chart, that Mars is trine the Jupiter-Mars-Pluto trine. Transiting Mars.
Transiting Mars, sure. Oh, that's interesting. I hadn't seen that. Yes. So it's creating a grand trine here. And it's gone, so that's January 12th. So we're a little bit further right now at this moment in time, a little behind that, but that, yeah, it's hitting it exactly. That's a nice grand trine to have, in which you will have for your solar return for this whole year. Yeah. And so it is, you know, fire is the life force itself. It's the fire of life. And then when you got Jupiter and Mars in Aries, it really is aligning with the life force and having the courage to because Aries rules birth, you know, is the first house. It is the sort of the ability to, as opposed to Capricorn, the ability to kind of dive into life and allow experience to show one's way, rather than the Capricornian, which absolutely, you know, Sun in Capricorn, Mercury in Capricorn, who needs to know where you're going and how you're going to get there, and planning and strategizing how to get there, and feeling, you know, the secure and comfort of each step along the way. So this Mars and Sagittarius for this next year is very much empowering the life force, and especially being guided by spiritual truth with Mars in the 12th house. Okay. Now you've got Saturn in Aries, which is kind of a contradiction. Jupiter in Aries and then Saturn later in Aries, which in conjunct the South Node. As evolutionary astrologers, we believe in the South Node is the past life ego identity that you came into this world to dissolve, and certainly to transmute and evolve. Now there's something around, you know, with Saturn in Aries, there's a fear around taking chances, taking risk. It's fear around the emotional body in the 4th house. So the North Node trajectory is moving towards relationship, Venus ruling relationship, through objectivity. Okay, Venus in Aquarius, which is coherent with the Pluto polarity point in Aquarius, okay, which is around moving from it's actually the ego identity that is very much focused on itself and its personal creativity, and its own personal dramas and its personal fears, to kind of standing back and giving space and air and sort of breathing room and objectivity to one's personal dramas or fears. So I think Aquarius, with Venus and Aquarius ruling the North Node in your 10th house here, certainly the Aquarian principles, the worldview of Aquarius. So let me back up. So in relationship to Capricorn, you know how I was talking about Capricorn is about structures and rules and regulations, especially, you know, society's structures and rules for the 10th house. So it's, you know, the North Node is with Venus and Aquarius ruling it, it's like creating your own, you know, it's sort of transmuting the crystallized patterns that suffocate and don't allow you to feel alive and feel engaged in relationship. Does that resonate for you, Sean?
Not really.
Okay. Where did I lose you?
No, you didn't lose me. I'm just, you know, I'm not sure that I would totally agree with the, you know,
Okay.
the effect, but that's all.
Yeah. So you don't feel sort of the call to kind of engage in relationship in a way that is not following, that kind of goes against the rules of your upbringing, or, you know, the conditioning that you were raised with, you know, basically creating more progressive ways of being in relationship.
No.
Okay. All right. So that then what I'm thinking is maybe, you know, the second house is having a strong influence around your personal resources, which is what I'm not getting, what I'm missing here. But it'll be interesting to see how it shows up, because this conjunction here on your sun in Capricorn, of course, it's gone over. Now this is the last hit of Saturn and Pluto on your sun, which is a truly, transmuting process. So really, truly feeling like your identity has been is in process of being transmuted, if you will. Has that been your experience over as the Saturn-Pluto has been going over actually your first house and then later to your sun?
Yes.
Yeah. Can you say a little more about that so I can get a sense for how you feel like it's transmuting, so your conditioning and kind of giving birth to, in some ways, a new you? Be one way to say it.
Well, I think being sick. It's challenged me to look at things a little differently.
Mm-hmm. Sure. And so, yeah, tell the audience here a little bit about being sick. What do you mean by that?
Well, I was diagnosed with stage 4 prostate cancer in April of 2018.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's when, and so I have my notes here with Saturn conjunct Sun exact on April, actually a year later, 2019. So Pluto was had been working your Sun prior to that, and then Saturn coming on exactly April 2019, sort of waking you up to life itself and the possibility of losing life, right? And the sun being in the first house here too, that's a reinforcement of the Aries principle of life itself. And so, yeah, so the cancer diagnosis, kind of imploding you inward, I guess. I don't know, that would be a Capricornian phase, but then, which would Saturn certainly would, was to force you to look inward and decide for yourself what is worthwhile, what is not worthwhile. Questions about life itself?
A lot of the Capricorn distortions that you talked about during the presentation were all very, very active for me during that whole time.
Okay, yeah. That's the birth canal, sort of the fears, the Saturnian fears getting triggered with the diagnosis.
Well, what I wrote down was the words that seemed particularly pertinent were the weariness, depression, lethargy, loss of desire to live, inability to change.
Okay. Got it.
So all of those were present or have been present since that diagnosis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And of course, the cancer itself is draining your energy as well, which is, the essence of life being drained from you. So being in the birth canal, and then also I want to point out too, is it is all, this conjunction is squaring your south node, north node axis.
Right.
Yeah, and that's a huge, in evolutionary astrology, that is just the transformation of this sort of ego, past ego identity with life, and your sense of courage and ability to take risk, with transmuting that from an old form into a newer form, and one that is more serving of your relationship with others and your relationship to the world. Are you feeling, are you experiencing that you're, because of the diagnosis, that it's shifting your relationship with others at all?
Um,
Or is it forcing you inward even more?
I think it's forcing me inward even more.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this is, I just would have to say, I've got to trust that you are intensely in the birth canal, the contraction of the birth canal, which is trying to, pump a different kind of relationship with life itself through the contraction processes. And part of the sort of emergence through the contraction and the birth canal, I would guess, not guess, but sort of, from an evolutionary astrologer's viewpoint, would be the Aquarian principle. The moon in Aquarius being nourished by, your vision, and larger, expansive relationship to the divine itself. Does that resonate at all, Sean?
Well, not yet, but I can see where what you're saying, and that may be something that that I can expect to occur in the next year or so.
Yeah, especially with the solar return, with the eclipse, the full moon eclipse, right on top of your sun.
Exactly.
Yeah, the sun here, the moon opposite it in Cancer. So one thing, so it's a combination of, there's something about, sorry, I can't leave the Aquarius, so I'm not sure exactly how that is translating in the second house, but I do see something around, the Aquarius is around our tribe, finding our soul tribe, being nourished by your soul tribe, finding like-minded people to connect with, okay, as a way towards, the ego identity that is more oriented towards others and not so self-oriented, which South Node in Aries can be. So yeah, but then the other piece I want to add too, with the full moon right on top of your sun, and the moon 20 degrees here in the 7th house of relationship, opposite the sun, and this reinforces the whole principle of what is North Node in Cancer, and then healing the emotional body through relationship, or healing the emotional body to feel more sort of centered in yourself and secure in yourself, trusting of yourself in relationship. So for you in particular, I think it just reinforces kind of the collective, what we're all experiencing is the need to own the emotional body, the feelings, and really working on healing the wounds in the emotional body. And also, of course, Chiron is the wounded healer. So it is the healer of when it is one's wound that becomes the healer for others as well in relationship. So it's not just about you, it's your kind of engaging with others in conversation around feelings, emotions, but the others need to be the kind of people that you trust, because they're your tribe. They're the people that you resonate with on a deep emotional level. Yeah. So I think the 20 degrees, moon on your birthday, the solar return, full moon eclipse and that is the full moon eclipse. It's the portal, that you're kind of being birthed into, coming into self-awareness with the full moon dynamic, seeing self versus other. Sun in Capricorn, and feeling sort of depressed and isolated, and the Capricornian sort of shackles in the distorted way, really focusing on balancing it with the emotions, and connecting to, and just finding people that surrounding yourself by people that nourish you. You don't need to be in intimate relationship with them or anything, but just connecting with them, having conversations with them, listening to them, to kind of water the dryness of the Capricornian nature here.
course, had eclipse. The eclipse at that point would have occurred previously in 2002, 2003, somewhere in that time period.
Yeah, from the cycle.
Which was an interesting time, because it's just before I made a major relocation.
Is this when you moved to? Oh, you moved from Sausalito, California?
To South Carolina, right.
Oh, to South Carolina, for the sake of family, right?
And then to Vermont, yeah.
Yeah, but you did that for the sake of family, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So that is interesting. So now this is another iteration of that, looking at it from a different, with all the years of experience that you've had since then. What's that, 18 years or so?
Right.
Yeah, the eclipse cycle. So, what are the lessons? And I know you're very self-reflective. So, looking at what were the lessons that you learned from that you can take into this next cycle as you're moving forward out of the birth canal.
Well, the biggest lesson was just don't make a stupid move.
But what made it stupid?
The cost and, ending up at a place where I didn't really want to be.
There you go. Yeah. Well,
I guess the lesson, without being facetious, the lesson would be to, while my motivation to be closer to what little family I have was a good one, it's important to think these things through to a greater extent, because that's never been my strong suit, which is the Mars and Aries.
Mars, Jupiter conjunction in Aries. Yeah, it's interesting because you've got the, you got Mercury. Of course, Mercury and Sun are the strategizers, but it is in the first house where, it's very instinctual. So, jumping on your instincts. And yeah, that's how you learn. But taking that, so back to the Pluto polarity point and Venus ruling your north node. And the other thing I want to say too, in evolutionary astrology, we go in reverse cycle, right? The planets go counterclockwise, but the nodes go clockwise. So whenever something is squaring your nodal axis, we go clockwise to see what the integration node is. And so it is actually the north node in Libra that is kind of the evolutionary trajectory, even though, of course, north node is the evolutionary trajectory anyway, but then with this Pluto, Saturn, Mercury, and then, Sun coming on real soon, and then Jupiter coming in there, squaring your nodal axis. There is a lot of focus here on developing your relationships in the world, 10th house. But Venus in Aquarius. So what do you know? Because you know astrology, you've been studying it for a while. When you think of Venus in Aquarius, what do you relate to with that? In the second house?
Freedom.
Yes. Yeah. Definitely. So finding relationships with people where you can maintain your freedom.
And it's almost an oxymoron.
Well, yes and no. Yeah, I hear you. But the reality is it's not, it isn't. It's you can self-create that. And that is important. And that actually, another thing I saw too, Venus rules your second house. So yeah, having freedom, your value of freedom is so essential for your evolutionary intention. And yes, you are allowed is not the right word, but you deserve to be in a relationship that allows you freedom, that gives you freedom.
I don't mean to contradict, but actually Capricorn rules my second house.
Oh, what was Capricorn? Right.
Saturn rules my second house. Yeah. So if you think about it, the restrictions in structure of Saturn are antithetical to the whole archetype of Aquarius.
Although, a couple of things. One, yes and no, because Aquarius is ruled by both Saturn and Uranus.
That's true.
Yeah. So let's look at those archetypes, because Saturn and Uranus together, they evolve the structures in a way that's liberating. You know, the Aquarian principle, the Uranian, you know, it liberates, it frees. And Saturn is the structures, it's the rules, it's the morals, it's the ethics, all of that. So you know, I keep getting the crystallization of the old structures, and then increasing the frequency, which would be Uranus and Aquarius, of the structure in a way that allows you freedom and mutual respect, you know, respect for each other. And yes, you're right. Saturn rules Capricorn, which rules at the cusp of your second house. And generally speaking, we also keep in mind that Venus rules the second house too. So the archetype of the second house.
Sure,
yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. So second house, Taurus and Venus. So you do. So you've got this interesting juxtaposition of Saturn and Uranus, you know, ruling your second house. And that, well, Uranus being, you know, ruling the Aquarius here, and then with Venus in Aquarius ruling the second house archetypally. So Saturn and Uranus, it's like, yeah, being in the conditioning, the security and the supportive relationship, and yet, you know, giving mutual freedom within the relationship. Loosening the reins of relationship, if you will. And creating your own in a way that it serves you.
But you've got, you know, a situation with Uranus, the secondary ruler of Aquarius, is in Taurus, which is ruled by Venus. So you've got a dispositor, a fixed loop there, where you go back and forth from the second to the fifth house.
That's right. Yes.
And you never get out of it. You're stuck in that loop. It goes back and forth.
Well, I wouldn't, except for transiting Uranus is coming in there, and it's just going to crack it right open. So, at 2 degrees Taurus here, it's coming into the fifth house of your creativity and your creative expression. And over time, I mean, it's going to take a long time, but still it's in resonance with your natal Uranus and Taurus, in helping you to free you. And then the other thing too is, you know, Venus is trining your nodal north node as well. Yeah, so there's a lot of support here around, I think, you know, you finding your tribe or, people that you resonate with on a soul level that inspire you, the Aquarius, and they have, you know, they're creating rules that are different than the kinds of rules that you were conditioned by, Sun in Capricorn.
Well, so far I haven't seen any sign of them, so that tribe may be as lost as I am.
Yeah, well, since you're right now squeezed in the birth canal right now, I think this next year is an opportunity for releasing that.
Well, let's hope so.
Yeah. So the point, though, of this presentation too is to keep focused on the vision, to keep focused on the future, in finding, you know, the Jupiter in Capricorn, which is right on top of your Mercury, the Cancerian component that it will, you know, nourish and nurture and heal the Chironian wounding of the emotional body. So. Well,
and with recently Jupiter crossing my ascendant, you know, it's the beginning of an important cycle. At least it's always been in my life, because Jupiter rules my ascendant. But you know, it's a 12-year cycle. It's sort of signals a major new beginning every time Jupiter crosses into Sagittarius, or crosses my ascendant.
Yeah, it gives you hope. Yep, absolutely. Yeah. And then you have the natal Jupiter conjunct your Mars, so it's like a new life, but you've got to create. And it is up to you in the second house. It's very much, whoops, I lost it there. Second house is very much, you know, self-sufficiency. It's up to you to create it. It's, find out what your desires are, Pluto polarity point in Aquarius. That liberates you, that gives you the freedom you need in relationship with others. I have no doubt you're going to find it. And by the way, you know that Aquarius, of course, rules astrology too. So,
Right.
yeah, something you've been studying for a long time in your own way. Actually, and using it for finances, right? Second house for understanding the financial
using
markets.
Astrology for finances,
Yeah.
using astrology as a way to look at the markets. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. And that is definitely so. Finding your tribe there. That's certainly a resonance with Moon, Venus, and Aquarius in the second house.
Well, this has been very helpful, Christina.
Great.
I really appreciate it.
You bet, Sean. You bet. I'm going to close this because we are at, I believe, an hour and a half. And if you want to hang on, I'll just connect with you in a second. So
actually, I've got an appointment I've got to go to.
Okay, great. Well, thanks so much, Sean. I super appreciate it. And
it was my pleasure. Good luck with your presentation.
Thank you, and happy birthday.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. And then for this presentation, I am going to basically, this is a pre-recording, so if anybody has any questions, please feel free to contact me. Or if you'd like to have the PowerPoint of this presentation, contact me at Christina@transpersonalservices.com. Email me that way, or you can connect with me through my website, and my email is there. You can just click on that. So thanks for listening. I really appreciate it. And again, feel free to contact me, and happy 2020. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.